You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, thank you for tuning in to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. I'm excited about our show today. My guest is a good friend. He's a gentleman who's become a brother to me. His name is Jerome Dillard. He is the State Director for EXPO, which is Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing. And we're going to be talking about mass incarceration, a huge issue in our country, but it's really hitting the state of Wisconsin in real unique ways. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of what he's doing and the tremendous work that he's doing, I like to check in with something that I call the Black Icebreaker. So, Mr. Dillard, I've got a couple of questions for you before we get into this. Okay. All right, growing up, grits or cream of wheat?
Grits.
All right. Did your grandma or your mother let you drink coffee as a kid?
No.
How come? What did they say? What happened?
I never had the desire to drink coffee.
Okay, all right. Collards or turnips?
Turnips.
Because it's fact or fiction. Did you have to be on the porch before the street lights came on?
Yes.
Did you ever have a Jerry curl?
Yes.
Did you use the word soap? Did you use the word soda pop or pop? Soda or pop?
Pop.
Okay, that's kind of a Chicago thing. All right. Red or grape with your pop?
Red.
All right, you're good. Wait, hold on, just got to make sure you're still, that you're doing all right, that you deserve to be on the show. Who's your favorite Supreme? And you can't say Diana Ross. Who's after Diana Ross?
Mary.
Oh, okay. One more. Have you ever seen the movie Superfly?
Several times.
Can you sing a single line from one of the soundtracks?
I'm your mama, I'm your daddy, I'm that nigga in the alley.
I'm your pusher, man.
You had to take me there,
okay, wow. Okay, now we are, wow, Black Like Me. Oh, my goodness, the first time was dropped the N-word on my show. Yeah, all right, this ain't radio, so we can say it. So listen, you all, I met Jerome Dillard when he was returning back to the community. Wow, Jerome, like almost 20 years ago.
21 years ago.
And man, I watched this man come from not really knowing where his next meal or next housing situation would be to actually sitting with presidential candidates, U.S. presidential candidates, talking about prison reform. He is committed himself to addressing the issues of injustice in our mass incarceration system. He puts himself out on the line. He's standing for the rights of folks. And our organization, our nonprofit, is committed to the area of reentry. But this man has coached me on what true reentry issues are, the statistics. He advised me on my doctoral dissertation on the impact that mass incarceration has had on fatherlessness in this country. And he travels the country lobbying about the needs of formerly incarcerated men and women. So I'm lucky to have him in town today, and even more lucky to have him in our studios. So Mr. Dillard, welcome to Black Like Me.
Thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here.
You doing all right today?
Yeah, I hope you got that invoice I sent you.
Yes, that is coming in. Yeah, I forwarded it to my people. And so, yeah, we're going to. Man, do you remember the day we met Jerome? You said it was like 20 plus years ago, and you're coming up the hill to where our church meets, man. And man, it was the first time I ever saw anybody on an ankle bracelet. And you remember that day?
I do remember that day, and how you looked at my hands because I had a manicure with polish.
I was like, wow, priorities. He just came home from some correction facility, but he had that man. Didn't have a job, but he had that manicure. But no, I was impressed. I was impressed. Now I know why you knew the lyrics to Superfly. So man, you were, you were a dishwasher. Mm-hmm. You worked in telemarketing. Mm-hmm. And you remember, Jerome, I think was it the 40th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech? Mm-hmm. We were doing sort of a prayer walk in the Meadowwood, the Allied community.
That's correct.
It's really where the new Boys and Girls Club is. And you mentioned that you had been formerly incarcerated. Your employer was watching the news during that interview. Mm-hmm. and fired you. How long? We don't have to say the name of the company. I mean, you can. We're on a podcast. It's my show. I have my own sponsor, and they don't mind at all. But am I remembering that correctly? They saw you and said, we didn't know he was formerly incarcerated, and fired you.
Well, truth of the matter is, I worked at one agency here. It was the first living wage employment that I had ever had. And I was recruited by this company, the second company.
That's right.
To come over and manage a department within there. It's a multi-million-dollar company.
Right.
And when I filled out the application, I didn't say yes or no to the question. That's why I couldn't be upset because, I did skip that box.
And for folks who don't know, what's the question? When you and I talk about the box, we know, but folks who are experiencing what it's like to be black in America through my perspective or through the perspectives of my guest, let them know what that box is, because many people don't realize.
The question is, have you ever been convicted of a crime?
Right.
At that time, we didn't have online records.
Right.
And employers had to pay for background checks. Me being recruited, I just assumed that they would not pay for it, which they didn't. What's ironic about that, I was employee of the month.
That month?
That month. I had a parking space. You get a special parking space. And I was one of 3 black men in there. And the CEO was African-American. And someone I hired who was African-American. But the fact is, we were on Allied trying to demonstrate what we've overcome.
Right.
And I remember clearly what your sign said. We wore name badges.
Right.
And mine said ex-con.
Yes.
And the news wanted to interview me.
I remember that. I remember.
Fox News interviewed me, and it was the opening story that night.
Right.
On the news.
Right.
And I went into work the next day, and a lot of people, I saw you on the news, man. That was great. That was great. But I got a different vibe from management. And it was 2 days later that they actually called me to Human Resources with a police officer standing there and told me, well, we're going to have to terminate you because you lied on the application. And I took it because I knew that I had skipped the box, that dreadful box.
Sure. And I know so much of your work is about banning that box. And again, when people hear us talk about banning the box, we're not saying that we want folks who have been convicted of sexual offenses against children being able to work in daycares and school. We're not talking about that. We're talking about an elimination process that won't even allow a person to get to the next round of the interviews. That if someone wants to know someone's criminal background or criminal history, see what you think about the individual first of all, and then offer do the due diligence. But let's let them get through the process. But we both know that when employers see that, they automatically think violent criminal, sex offender.
It goes into the trash.
It goes right into the trash. So then from there, they a number of things happen. But what I remembered is the resilience of that you demonstrated, your resolve. And so, it took a little while, but eventually you began to come on the scene as the individual who talked about that ordeal. Now, what I do respect about you, Jerome, is that you could have dragged that company through their name through the mud, and you took ownership because you didn't check the box. But as a result, man, here you are. You're the State Director of EXPO. I mean, you and I are talking. Sometimes you say, hey, man, I'm heading up to D.C. I'm going to be lobbying. One time you told me, hey, I'm heading over to Iowa. Pray for me. Hillary's going to be there. Bernie's going to be there. We want to talk to them about what their platforms are, what their platform is or their ideas for prison reform. Man, did you think that you would go from a guy washing dishes to a person who's lobbying and traveling this country on the rights of people who've been incarcerated? Did you ever see yourself becoming a national figure?
Well, I remember clearly, and I believe I've shared this with you while incarcerated. I'm a 3-time convicted felon.
Okay.
And
so that means you did 3 different prisons.
Three terms in 3 different prisons.
That's cool. And so 2 were state, 1 was fed?
1 was fed.
Okay.
My middle incarceration was fed.
Okay.
5 years in federal prison.
Okay.
Where I really witnessed something that touched my heart, and that was busload after busload. I worked in receiving. Okay. And so when the buses came in, I was
receiving inmates?
Yes.
Okay.
Where we hand out the bed rolls, uniforms, socks, underwear. And during that period, I witnessed just hundreds and hundreds of men coming into that institution. It was a time when the war on drugs was first initiated, as far as under the Reagan administration. Truth in sentencing had just came into place. I was sentenced under truth in sentencing, being sentenced in January of 1987. And within that year, I just saw thousands, really, of young African-American men coming into that institution with 30, 40 years for drugs.
And like as young as what?
It's 17, 18 years old. What they were doing at that time was using the RICO Act and gathering masses of young men in the inner city and hitting them with the RICO Act, which is a conspiracy to sell drugs. And many of them, I remember a 17-year-old crying. He was just a lookout. He was just someone who would stand out and look for the police. He had 30 years
for doing that.
You
know, Jerome, man, you were the first person who ever coined the phrase or the saying about childbearing years. Because often you think about women talking, mentioning, hey, I need to get married or get in a relationship because these are my childbearing years. You're the first person who I ever heard say, these men were locked up during their childbearing years.
Well, the prime of their lives.
The prime of their lives. But these are men who couldn't have children.
Right.
And I mean, in terms of just how we populate our community, these were men who at 17, if you're locked up for 20 or 30 years, you're not having children. It's the prime of your life. It's when you should be in your career, but it's when you should be either starting a family, or leading or being a part of your family. And so that roundup you're talking about had a huge impact.
I looked at it. That's what moved me, because one thing that I felt in my spirit, this is a form of genocide. When young men are losing the prime of their lives, the times when they should be establishing themselves and planning their future and having children, it felt like genocide to me.
Yeah, there's a quote right here I took off the Expo website where you said, "I see the prison system as a form of genocide. As I watch hope drain from the people who are permanently tagged as felons, it's no wonder they don't feel that they are a part of America."
Absolutely. And today, many of our young people are being tagged with that felon tag at 16, 17 years old. And I just see a increase in hopelessness in our community because there is discrimination in housing, discrimination in employment. And when these young men can't find a job, it's draining they're in a state of hopelessness. Right. They feel that they're in a state of hopelessness.
You know, Jerome, another thing I saw on the website, and I know this, about your story as well. You mentioned that both of your parents were gainfully employed.
Yes.
That, but back in the day, you grew up on Chicago's South Side, and you said people could get jobs, either in factories, at the docks, but people could become middle class and work, like they did in Detroit. They worked for the car factories and things like that. But as jobs started to leave, and then unemployment began to rise, you saw that there's a rise of gang activity because people were trying to meet needs. That contextualization is important because when people think about crime and drugs, they think people just get up one day and just say, you know what, I want to destroy my community. I want to just start selling drugs. But what I was able to draw from your quotes was that when people had jobs and felt like they were contributing and the community was fun and strong, you didn't see drugs the way you see it now.
Yes, absolutely. That's part of my story. We never wanted for anything. Actually, I lived in a home with my grandmother, grandfather, stepfather, and mother.
So it's a 3-generation family,
Yes,
grandparents.
all working. Yes,
All
all
working.
working. My stepfather worked in the steel mill, did very well. We had benefits. We
Wow.
would go to the doctor for wellness checks and to the dentist a couple of times a year.
Right.
I just saw all his hope or all his pride just drained when they closed the steel mill in the early 70s.
Because that's how he took care of his family. That was part of his.
Yes.
That's what he did every day to
Yes.
contribute.
And my mother worked in a factory. It wasn't paying a real whole lot, but she did well.
And the cost of living was lower then, but they worked.
But they had good paying jobs with pensions and retirement and benefits. And what I witnessed was just tens of thousands of men on the South Side alone suddenly unemployed because jobs were being shipped out of the country.
Right.
Not only my stepfather, but the man upstairs who worked at Bell and Howe, Mr. Davis, the guy across the street, all my friends' parents, we witnessed them suddenly unemployed, and every day it would look like a holiday on our block. People just hanging out.
So the devastation, you watched it creep into the communities. See, and this is really important. And Jerome, this is why I do this podcast, because I'm inviting people who don't know what life is like in the Black experience to really understand it through either my rants or my stories or conversations with my guests. One of the things I know about you, and this tells of the strength of your community, that you and your boys still go to the opening game for the Bears.
Yes.
Every year. You all have been doing it for how many years, Jerome?
20 years now. They've been doing it for 20 years. I've been with them for 16 years.
How long have you been friends with these guys?
We grew up together. I'm talking about third grade.
See, you remind me like the Fat Albert crew, where we have folks like, who just kind of grow up together. So don't you all still do reunions or get-togethers in the community?
Father Day picnics where there's probably 40 or 50 of us who went to grammar school together.
Are still getting together.
Yep.
Because see,
Every
kids growing up now on Chicago's South Side don't understand that just a generation or two ago, this was the legacy of that community. It wasn't the Chirac. It wasn't when industry was booming and folks were industrious and working. Life looked completely different.
It was unity in the community. It was, and I feel that we were protected because we had big brothers and uncles there who kept us in check, but also kept us safe from surrounding communities of where gangs were beginning to flourish.
And you're making this great connection. This is where I'm just going to go off track a minute and just rant for a moment. When we think about mass incarceration, we just think, sort of like the old Beretta theme song. Who sang that? Was that Sammy Davis Jr.? Don't go to bed with a price on your head.
Right.
Don't do the crime if you don't want to do the time. It's so easy to sit on the sidelines. And I used to do this until you pulled me off. Well, then they shouldn't have done that crime if they didn't want to be convicted for it. What we're understanding, what you have helped me to understand, is that when we have these roundups and with the onset of the war on drugs, as these men began to leave our communities for prison, those men who used to protect you, those men who mentored you, those men who, if they didn't have jobs, still got a pickup and would do what we call junking growing up. They would go haul trucks and stuff to make money. When that infrastructure, that fabric of our community left because of prison or because of drug addiction, or you and I both know men came back from the Vietnam War and the Korean War and they weren't right and didn't get the mental health services they need and started drinking and drugs are there, we began to lose those safeguards and those community keepers. And so young boys today don't have those older men or that network of men around you.
Exactly.
And so it's not just that our communities have gone to hell in the handbasket. When these men who are protectors of the community were taken away. And again, when I say taken away, you and I both know we're community activists and we're leaders. If someone does a crime, there are laws. Things need to happen. Prisons are built for a reason. There are people, because of their crimes, they need to do that. But you've helped me to understand the bulk of people who are in prisons are not there for violent crimes, and the recidivism rate is for victimless crimes, for rule violations, and not for new crimes. And so when you and I are talking about mass incarceration, we are not being soft on crime. We're not saying that rapists and mass murderers and robbers should not be treated properly, through a system of rehabilitation. You and I are talking about the men who are being rounded up because they're unemployed or have unchecked mental health issues, and they're being caught with crack, they're being caught with weed, and they're going to jail for nonviolent crimes. Am I correct? Is that what you and I are talking about?
You hit the nail on the head. Many uncles and big brothers and fathers were rounded up and incarcerated, which left so many young men searching for that figure, that role model. And oftentimes they got only place that they can find that was in the streets, because it was not in the homes. And so the flourishing of street gangs began to just spiral out of control.
Wow.
And the crack epidemic it devastated our community.
You remember when that hit Chicago?
I was caught up in it.
Did it started on the East Coast and then moved?
It started
west?
on the West Coast.
Crack started on okay.
Yeah, it started on the West Coast.
I'm going back to my New Jack City experience, so I can't learn everything from TV.
Yeah, it was full blown when New Jack City.
It was already out there.
Yeah.
The West Coast, okay.
Yeah. The crack rock just devastated communities. Came across this country like a plague. And it devastated our communities. I can recall seeing one of my old girlfriends who was class valedictorian at one of the best high schools in Chicago.
Wow.
Coming back to the city and seeing her on the streets doing anything for a hit of crack. It was mind-boggling, but it shows the impact, the extent of good people being caught up in this epidemic, and
wow,
kids were left to raise themselves. It wasn't uncommon for kids to have to fend for themselves. It's for food,
and it was affordable. I mean, it was inexpensive.
Yeah, but that was.
That's part of the plan. Yeah, you're not on radio. You can say it. This is podcast. This is Black Like Me.
Okay, then. It was part of the plan.
Could people really get addicted from the first hit?
I was.
I can one hit. Like people experiment with all kinds of things.
I can speak for
one
myself.
Hit. When you used for the first time, were you aware that you could become addicted?
No, I wasn't.
One hit?
No, it was just.
What does it do? Does it blow your mind? Does it like? Did you like go to heaven?
Well, I'll put it in the category of having sex.
Okay.
And at that climax,
it was like that. Like many times over?
Yeah. Many times over. I mean, that's...
wow.
Yeah.
And so then people keep looking.
They call it chasing a ghost.
Chasing a ghost.
One is too many and 1,000 is not enough is a saying that's used in the recovery community.
Say that again.
One is too many and 1,000 is not enough. That means one hit, and it's off to the races. And I can recall being on binges, and up for 2 or 3 days, and on a Sunday. Trying to find somewhere. It seemed like some of the places closed down, but on a Sunday, just trying to find somewhere to get more drugs, more crack, and seeing people going to church and inside, I just said, I wish I could be like them. There seemed to be a glow with these individuals who were taking care of their families and seeing families going to church together. I never thought that I could be that. I could be like that, caught up in this rage that I was caught up in.
Because of all the stuff that was going on with you.
Yep.
There's something I remember about your story. You need to write a book, though. You've heard me say that more than once. Mm-hmm. And there are people who can help with that. So just remember this. This is something that my publisher told me when my first book came out. They said, Alex, we need storytellers. We have people who can edit and write, but we need storytellers. Focus on your story. Don't worry about writing.
Okay.
Because people just need to hear from you. Like you told me about, you had friends who died right in front of you. Didn't you tell me you had a buddy who died right in your arms?
Right.
Was that high school? Was that junior high?
14 years old, yeah.
14 years old. I mean, if that happens in schools today, there are all kinds of trauma experts that are released on schools, but we've had generations, Jerome, generations of black kids being traumatized at school, at home, kids dying right in their arms, and no one helped them to process that. How do you get up and go to algebra after your buddy has just died in your arms? How do you go on about life? And then people look at kids growing up in these urban realities and they blame it on not having mothers and fathers, but nobody's talking about the trauma that's present day in and day out. Can you just talk about that for a little bit? Some of that trauma?
Yeah. Well, one thing I do know with the prison population, traumas run rampant.
I bet.
They run rampant. I was fortunate enough to work in a mental health prison.
Do those exist anymore?
Well, Wisconsin is unique. It's not ran by the Department of Corrections. It's ran under the Department of Health Services.
The prison is?
The prison is.
Wow. Okay.
Actually.
Or the program?
No, it's actually a facility.
Okay.
But DOC, Department of Correction, is their main clients.
Okay.
So there's a mix of staff. There's DOC staff and there's Department of Health Services staff, which are psychologists, technicians, and the ratio is much greater in there per inmate. I mean, there's a ratio of 3 staff per 1 inmate in these institutions. Not the same in Department of Corrections.
No, not at all.
But the fact is, trauma, those traumas, because shortly after that, it wasn't long before I watched a girlfriend's mother murdered. And we were maybe 30 feet away when we watched this guy get out the car. She ran around the car. He shot her. And we went on, we talked to the police and gave them our names and everything. And we went on. We were going to the Regal Theater at the time.
You were how old?
This was 14, 15 years old.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, we were taken in. We were told to point this guy out.
Wow.
All 3 of us pointed him out, and we were just sent on our way. And the fact is, we went to trial. 2 of us said she ran around the front of the car. 1 said she ran around the back of the car, and our testimony was thrown out. This man got away with this.
He got away.
He did time for the gun. Our testimony was thrown out, and he had a good lawyer. I'm not going to mention this lawyer's name.
He had a good lawyer.
Because he became a Illinois Supreme Court justice later on. But he was able to get our testimony thrown out, and we know what we witnessed, and something wasn't right about that. Something wasn't right about that, and I felt that there's no justice for us in this country. Even as a young man,
you noticed that,
and I became rebellious against the system, not knowing why.
Wow.
But the traumas of seeing these deaths, that wasn't the only thing. Actually, I'm a victim of generational traumas. My grandmother, who for a long time I believed in my heart did not love me, because she would whoop that butt.
Right.
I ain't gonna, but
sure.
She'll get it.
She'll get it.
And
she'll get it till you didn't have it no more.
It wasn't gonna break a switch off. It was whatever she could get her hand on.
Shoe belt bottle.
And only later on to find out that she was a victim of. She was traumatized by seeing her brother murdered by a sheriff and another brother hang in the South. So she came north as a refugee, running from the treatment of
and Jerome, those mothers and grandmothers were hard on us because they were afraid
they
were
were
end
trying to protect us.
They were trying to protect us. They were trying to beat the fear of God into us, get it into us, because if we could respect them, they could protect us.
Yep.
But if we were lippy to them, we could be lippy to a white police officer or someone out in the community, and we could be lynched, we could be beaten, we could be dragged behind a truck, because Emmett Till to her generation is like Tony Robinson or Michael Brown to our generation. They knew that was real, and Till was from Chicago.
Yes.
So for people who were raised in Chicago, that wasn't just like national folklore. That hit close to home. That boy was from Chicago.
Yeah.
and had all that stuff done to them. So there's a generation
But
of
it
moms
didn't
and grandmothers.
surprise
They're afraid.
any of those, many of those. It did not surprise them what was done to this kid in the South.
Didn't surprise them.
It did not. And I remember vividly the Jet magazine that bared his picture on the cover.
Wow. So there's all this trauma that's going on, and it's very interesting that you said you saw that lack of justice. First of all, as a 14-year-old, you were rounded up. Were your parents with you when you did the lineup?
Never,
First of all, that's
never,
crazy.
Ever. Never ever.
Did you have a choice of not going to court? Did your parents have to get permission?
No.
They subpoenaed you as a minor.
Well, they told us to come.
So you were in court. So the dude who was on trial could see your face.
Mm-hmm.
So they knew who you were.
He saw us when we pointed him out. It wasn't through a glass.
It was not through.
We went to the district police station.
Are you
they
serious?
had a lineup of 5 or 6 guys, and they told us point him out, and we.
And he could see you point him out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's all kinds of wrong. So
well, that police station, and there was a lot of wrongs
right
in that district because they closed it down, and actually one of the lead detectives did time for some of the stuff that he did. He was eventually indicted for some of the stuff that he did in that district.
So I mean, here's one case that has ripple effect of trauma. First of all, you saw a woman, anyone being shot. You saw a woman shot, a woman who was running, going around a car trying to get away from her life.
She actually died us trying to get her into a truck when.
So she was shot in the front?
No, she was shot in the front and back, but many of them were. He unloaded the whole the gun.
I mean, so that's
and then
that's
her
crazy
kids
trauma.
Coming out of the house to see their mother laying in a doorway, shot and trying to breathe.
I mean, Jerome, how many years ago was that? You said 40. That was 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
50 years
and I can
ago.
still look at your reaction and in your eyes when you think about that. That for just a second, you went back there.
Yeah.
And so people carrying this kind of trauma, then you're supposed to focus on algebra or history and all of these other kinds of things. And so, and again, we're helping people to understand where some of the pipelining begins. It's not just that children get up and just say, I want to go to prison. Sometimes it's through foster care. It's being abused in foster care. It's being abused in their homes. It's seeing murders. So I want people to understand that there's a history. Everyone has a story. And people don't just get up and just want to go to prison. So there's this mess. All of this stuff is going on. There's hopelessness in the community. Jobs are leaving. Parents are depressed. Crack cocaine comes to the street. There's a war on drugs. People are getting addicted. In the early 70s, Mark Maurer, who I know who's a colleague of yours, he wrote Race to Incarcerate. Right. You introduced me to him. I think I went to a meeting with you when he was in town. In his book, he said that the federal government was thinking about closing down prisons in the early 70s.
Sure were.
Because they weren't useful, weren't rehabilitating people. The next thing we know, it's big business. And today, prisons are even privatized, which means there are people investing in these prisons. Am I getting that correct?
It is huge. Yes, you're absolutely correct.
And in the state of Wisconsin, aren't you working right now against some legislation where I want to make sure I'm getting it straight, but is there interest in Wisconsin right now for privatized prisons?
Well, yes, because of a couple of people who are highly connected or who are in government here are a part of that ALEC. And
tell people what ALEC is?
American Legislative Exchange Council.
Okay.
Which was created back in the 70s, actually. It's been around for a long time. And that's part of the many laws that have been passed in our nation. Seems like everything is criminalized. A kid playing baseball and knocked the ball through someone's window. I've seen this. Being charged with criminal damage to property.
For playing baseball.
For playing baseball and breaking someone's window. I mean, just seems like everything is criminalized. And these laws that were passed to increase penalties, to lock up people young.
Right.
I mean, at 17 years old, you if you're convicted of a felony, you lose the right to vote before you can even vote. We have a gentleman who's never voted in his life.
Right.
He's 44, 45 years old.
Has never ever voted.
Never voted because he has not been out of the system since he was 12 years old. It doesn't surprise me because that's pretty commonplace.
But what people don't know, and again, this is what you helped me to understand, when you're in a state prison, you're counted in the census for that state,
Absolutely.
which helps to get money from
Not
the federal
the
government
state,
for
but that county.
of that county. So there's a prison. Let's say if there's a prison in, whatever county it's in, the prison population is counted in the census.
That's
correct. So that those numbers are increased.
Are
because those folks are not necessarily from that county.
Right.
You went to prison in counties where you didn't live, but then you can't vote on how those designated federal dollars are used in that district. So your bodies are counted to get more federal dollars, but you can't vote on it as long as you're connected in the system. So if you're on paper, on probation, you still cannot vote, correctly?
That's correct. In the state of Wisconsin.
Now, in some states you lose. If you've been a felon, you lose it forever, right?
Yeah, very few, but
that's changing.
But I've seen one reversal.
Have you really?
Those are southern states, Louisiana, Florida.
So in Louisiana, if someone had a felony, they could never vote again?
Yep. Unless you get a pardon from the governor.
And that's not very easy.
And that's not happening.
Man, I mean, there's so much. Let me just remind folks, my guest today is Jerome Dillard. As you can tell, he's a man of great wisdom and great passion, and his life is a story. And so you're getting some of the real word from the street here on Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. I'm looking at a statistic from your site that said a few years ago, Wisconsin spent over $1.3 billion per year in Department of Corrections. It actually exceeded the budget of the University of Wisconsin, Madison.
That is still true today. That is not just a few years ago. And actually, Wisconsin and our state, they are pushing to build new prisons.
Really?
And right now, we're fighting a Senate bill that would increase the corrections budget by $350 million.
Is this Senate Bill 54?
That is correct.
To increase it by $350
million. $300 to build, which they have already looked at private prison builders, those who build prisons for private prisons to come in and build this. We lease it, and in 2022, then we'll make a decision if we're gonna buy it or let private prisons run it. I think it's a segue into bringing private prisons into the state of Wisconsin, which private prison builders do put stipulations that they want 90% occupancy. And the state of Ohio bought into that.
A stipulation.
I mean, that's in there.
They want 90%
it
occupancy.
Has to be 90% occupied.
We're not talking about 90%. You're not talking about employees. You're not talking about guards. Inmates. You're talking about inmates. They want 90% so that they can get a return on their investment.
Well, they're getting a return
this is slavery.
on their investment, but what it does, they can penalize the state if it dips below 90%. And the state of Ohio is going through this right now.
So then how does the state make sure that it keeps up with its 90% occupancy? What kinds of things can the state do to make that happen?
Well, right now, we're talking about prison overcrowding in the state of Wisconsin. The fact is, we have over 3,000 who are going back into prison for no new crimes.
So they're not
committing crimes.
They're not sticking anybody up. They're not beating anybody. It's rule violation.
Rule violations.
So getting in too late,
or even allegations. If someone wants you out the way, and I've seen this happen where a woman is dating someone new, and the ex come home, and he has children there or whatever the case may be. All she needs to do is make an allegation that he threatened me, and we've both seen this.
We both
Alex.
have seen it.
And he's gone. And the average sentence for on a revocation is 15, 18 months. That's the average.
That means you lose your apartment, you lose your job,
you lose
all the grounds. Again, Mr. Dillard and I are strong advocates for safety. If someone comes out and returns to their old behavior,
Absolutely.
we don't want them around our children, our sons, our daughters. But when you've gotten into an argument and the person knows that all they got to do is say, I felt threatened, that they can lose 15, 18 months of their life, that means when they come out, they are starting at ground zero, which makes them more prone for criminal activity.
Well,
it's a cycle.
One of the frustrating parts of my job when I was reentry coordinator for our county was the individuals who were just being put in jail for a traffic ticket or whatever, non-reporting, many different reasons, not necessarily revocated, but put in jail for 3 or 4 weeks and then just let go. When I'm advocating, saying, I know this person, he has a job, he's taking care of his family.
Or he's a student.
But, he's taking care of his family. There's no new charges. He can keep his job if he can report back by Monday.
Right. Why interrupt his life?
Right. But this is constantly happening. There's no revocation. The cycle of in and out and in and out, costing individuals. We're pretty much many people I know, including myself, are probably 2 weeks, 2 paychecks away from being homeless. But these individuals are losing those jobs and the hopelessness that comes with it. But what's scary is this bill, the Senate Bill 54, is saying take that out of Department of Corrections' hands as far as who gets revocated and who doesn't. Automatic revocation for any misdemeanor or felony charges automatically goes into revocation. The agent can't say, well, he's working, let's keep him out. So no
one can advocate for them. It's just fast tracking people right back to the system.
That would be law. These are heard through administrative judges. They're not real judges. Due process is very minimal.
That's just going to send more people back to prison. That's how we're going to keep that 90%.
Exactly.
Occupation.
And right now, we're renting 500 county jail beds for prison inmates. We're at 487. One of our representatives came out with a inmate 501 because once we hit 500, inmate 501 will be sent out of state, and we'll be sending individuals out of state to private prisons.
And by private prisons, you mean they have investors, so people are paid. People get an investment on that, just like they would in investing in, it's trade on the New York Stock Exchange. It's CCA.
It was CCA.
See, you said it's changed because too many people got on it, but you can find it. Oh my goodness!
Well, the fact is, when the economy crashed, and you were there for when I was awarded the Martin Luther King Jr.
Definitely
Humanitarian Award. But when the economy crashed, we were in chaos. But I'm reading a Wall Street Journal with my friend Jerry Hancock, and it blew me away to see stocks that's steady and rising. Corrections Corporation of America.
Privatized prison.
Can't lose stock. Private prisons. And that has impacted me. So I started to follow that trend. And when they sent the letter out to 50 states saying we can do prison business much less than what you're paying, but we need a guaranteed 90% occupancy. I still have that letter.
Trying to make me. I want that letter.
I still have
what
that
I want.
letter.
We're almost running out of time. I want to ask you just a couple of other questions. But one, I would love to have you back on my podcast with someone who works with the New York Stock Exchange. It could be someone who trades or whatever. And I want them to help us to break down the investments of this, like the portfolio. People who are putting money in, how much are they giving out? Because when people hear that, Jerome, I know they don't think that we're serious. Well, but they can Google it. You can Google, Corrections Corporation of America. I know the name has changed, but if you Google it, it can tell you about its holdings. I had a friend who is a trader in New York. Tell me about it. Tell me the symbol. He knew the board members of it. It's sick, but this is real. This is not just something we're talking about in Wisconsin because of how poorly we handle this, how we incarcerate more black men on a per capita basis. But this is real. People are making money off of people in prison.
Well, it's bigger than that.
Really?
It's bigger than that because goods and services is a multi-billion-dollar business.
So you're talking about
I'm talking about healthcare. I'm talking about the phone services. I'm talking about goods and services that are manufactured. You and I had a chance to visit Badger State Industry, where all these desks and chairs,
ergonomically designed furniture
by prisoners.
Someone in the department said, Reverend G, when you need to buy new equipment for your church, don't go to these expensive places. Come to us because we have furniture that's ergonomically designed and it's affordable, and it's made right here in the state of Wisconsin. Inmates are making what, 29 cents an hour?
Well, that's a good paying job. Most of them are making 12, 13 cents an hour.
To make clothing and to make furniture
and license plates and farming and
man. So listen, tell me this. I want to put a link to what you're working on alexg.com on my website. So I want to put information about what you're doing around Senate Bill 54. So when people come, I'm going to link them to either Expo or wherever you want me to have that link to, so they can just come to alexg.com. What do you need people to do, particularly in the state of Wisconsin? People are listening to us all around the country, but what do you need people in the state of Wisconsin to do once they get this information?
Well, right now,
call someone, write someone. What's the call to action?
Right now, our campaign is to kill the bill.
Okay.
This is a very, very, very bad bill for Wisconsin.
So we kill it by calling?
We need to call representatives, our senators, really, because if it doesn't...
Are U.S. senators?
No.
Our
state senators. I believe that we only need 3 or 4 of them to reject this bill to keep it from passing.
So we need to put pressure
on the floor. So we do need to put pressure. It's a Republican-sponsored bill, and if you go to the website, the senators, you can see who's lined up on there.
So we'll get people all linked to all of that.
And just bombard the Senate with calls. We have to. We're having an action on the 13th that we will be visiting our state capitol. Hundreds of people, hopefully thousands, will be doing these visits with the state senators in the Capitol prior to this hitting the floor, going up for vote, to let them know they need to kill this bill.
Definitely.
It's bad for our state.
Have people been able to kill a similar bill to this in other states?
Yes.
Like, give me an example of other.
Well, the fact is, other states have lined up with a new direction. They realize that incarcerating people is expensive.
It's expensive.
That is.
Wait, what's expensive? How much per person? Like, what do we mean we say expensive?
Well, the state of Wisconsin's paying roughly. I'm gonna round it off to $35,000 an inmate per year.
And if you're a juvenile, it's like $75,000.
It's close to $100,000 a year.
And just think about that. If we put,
but our juvenile system, we have found a way of keeping juveniles out of the system. It's because of the expense. Right. And our juvenile facility is only 30% occupied now. Okay. So now we're looking at, well, it was introduced by a representative in his inmate 501 to close that facility and build more local facility. I mean, it's way up north. Sure. Keep the kids close to home.
Sure.
And turn that facility into a drug treatment. We have over 5,000 people who are waiting on drug treatment inside our correctional facilities now.
They're still waiting. You said you did 3 prison stints
and never got treatment.
You never got treatment.
Never got treatment.
Never got treatment.
All my crimes were driven by my addiction, nonviolent.
You spent a total of what, 11 years in prison? Yep. Never got a single meeting?
Never got treatment.
Wow. But we're proposing $350 million more dollars we're proposing to put even more money in to
building prisons, and operation.
And 300, and we're not getting people treatment.
And no one's getting treatment.
This is a travesty. This is evil. All right, so people can go to alexg.com to get information on how to act here in the state of Wisconsin. I want to get more information off the air to find out about the date on the 13th, because I want to have to get the word out. I'm going to push it through my social networks. I do want you to come back when we have someone who understands stock exchange trading. I want to have that discussion about how that works. I want to go through the portfolio. I want them to break this down for us. This is important. Fatherlessness is something that's near and dear to my heart, because my father, after my parents' divorce, was not in my life. And as I reflect back, a lot of that had to do with incarceration. He was in and out of jail, in prison. Because of over-incarceration, you hit something very important, Mr. Dillard. You said the people who would be uncles, godfathers, mentors, are in prison. And so these young kids are there to fend for themselves. And you said on certain days, you've seen a son, his dad, and a grandfather all be released on the same day from prison. 3 generations.
For different crimes. I've seen inside. I've seen a father and a son cell together.
Wow. Listen, a very, very heavy episode today. Appreciate you listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. My guest has been Mr. Jerome Dillard. As you can tell, he is insightful. He's a go-to person in our community, and for the Jerome Dillards all around this nation, find them, Google them, find out who are the champions of reentry issues, who are working to really dismantle this crazy evil system and trying to lift up men and women coming out of prisons who have been over incarcerated and come back to the community depleted. Find out who those people are, support them, put money behind their causes. Mr. Dillard, just tell us how can people find out more information about Expo? What's your website?
Well, our website is ROC Wisconsin, ROC Wisconsin.org. Much of our stuff is on there. We share, along with Wisdom, which is a statewide organization that's part of a national organization, the Gamelia Network, which we have taken on mass incarceration as an issue around the country. Been fortunate enough to work with other formerly incarcerated, organized and ran organizations around the country.
Because you all are setting the agenda.
Yes.
We need the voice of people understand it to really dismantle this. Let the other step out of the way.
I do want to say in closing that, President Obama felt us. He heard our voice, and he banned the box on federal employment applications,
right?
Which was one of the first things that was rescinded.
With the Trump administration, he rescinded that.
Yep.
Wow.
But, we have to keep organizing as impacted individuals, and with over 70 million people with arrest and conviction records in our nation, I feel that we can impact
definitely
elections and impact mass incarceration.
Definitely. Well, I so appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate that you are organizing and that you are using what was a troubled past as a platform to change lives for others. That's tremendous, and I really, really appreciate it. Again, my guest today has been Mr. Jerome Dillard, the State Director of EXPO, Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing. Thank you for listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G, and tune in again real soon.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.